Blitzt oder Hollisch gesucht Garion, haben da schon Knädelach. Kicher nach Frieden, nach Hammer und Busch, Trost auf Geld, gibt und Tisch. Grad mal Kischke, Strudel, Krisches, Pilze, Schlösser, Briskets, Helles, Matze, Bridget, Leberlos. Grad mal Kischke, Strudel, Krisches, Pilze, Schlösser, Briskets, Helles, Matze, Bridget, Leberlos. Wege noch Latkes, Pirogel, Lach, Lugo, Hoff, darum Sass. Ambusch, die Tollen, Tobak, am Krem, Krem, so Kugel, Tegelach. Let's talk to Matze, Peter, Flush, and Kuba, Palachin, to Golden, and Young Chicken Soup. Let's talk to Matze, Peter, Flush, and Kuba, Palachin, to Golden, and Young Chicken Soup.
Everybody, and welcome to the Edinburgh Jewish Cultural Centre live. I'm David Ian Neville, and I'll be presenting the event tonight. We're going to start in a minute or two, but first, just a couple of things about this evening. In a minute, we're going to mute everybody, and only the speakers and myself will be able to talk. We'll have a conversation for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have a question and answer session. It's my great pleasure to introduce our guests, Phil Alexander and Stephanie Brickman. Phil and Stephanie formed the Yiddish Song Project several years ago, and hopefully we're going to find out how that all started and also hear about their musical roots and passions. Phil Alexander is a British Academy Research Fellow at the University of Glasgow, where he looks at historical Jewish-Scottish musical encounters. He's also a busy musician. He leads and plays with the band Mousie's Bagel, and he also plays with other leading folk and jazz musicians throughout the UK. Stephanie Brickman is a journalist, communications professional, a singer, a mother, a wife, a sister, and a daughter, in no particular order, she tells me. She grew up in the north of England, but counts herself to be from Edinburgh because she's lived here longer than anywhere else, and it's apparently marginally more glamorous than Harrogate. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Phil and Stephanie. Phil and Stephanie, are you there?
Yes, hi everybody.
Hi. There you are. Right, we're on speaker view. So lovely to see you both. Stephanie, you've admitted you're not originally from Edinburgh, and I believe before coming to Edinburgh, you moved around quite a bit, didn't you? Can you tell us a bit about your upbringing and where you lived before Edinburgh?
Well, I actually mostly lived in fact, only lived in North Yorkshire, but my parents moved around quite a lot once it was pretty much at the same time as I moved to Edinburgh to go to university. My parents were expatriates. They moved abroad about a year before and were in Brunei in the north of Borneo, and then various places, Hong Kong, Oman in the Middle East. And I think that made me put roots down more firmly in Edinburgh because I didn't have an alternative home like other students did. Other students could nip home every couple of weeks or take their washing back and that sort of thing. And I really didn't have another home base other than where I was in Edinburgh. So.
Oh, right. And why did you choose Edinburgh? Was there some particular reason? No, you came to university, but why here?
It's just such a beautiful city. That's what drew me there. I was being a little bit contrarian, rebellious, and in growing up in the north of England, people either went to the Northern English red brick universities, so it was Sheffield, Newcastle, Leeds, Manchester, or they went to London. And I decided I'd just go in the other direction and go to Edinburgh. I didn't want to go to a red brick university because these are all cities that don't have castles.
Right, I see. So you're attracted to the castle. And what were you studying at the university?
Do you know, I started off studying social anthropology, and then I switched to study German because I did German as an outside course, and I really, really loved it. And I also had the feeling that social anthropology was useless. And that's quite ironic now, because currently I work for the World Health Organization as my day job. And actually we use anthropologists all the time in the communications work that we do in communities. So it turned out to be incredibly useful. But
Right, so
yeah.
everything comes in useful in the end.
Absolutely.
Well, let's just hear a bit from Phil now. So, Phil, you didn't grow up in Edinburgh. Can you tell us a bit about where you grew up and a bit about your background?
Yeah, I grew up in North London, kind of dyed-in-the-wool member of the North London Jewish liberal intelligentsia, which was a fine place to grow up. I had lots of fun. Was kind of brought up in a noisy, left-wing, warm Jewish North London household. And I lived and worked as a musician for several years in London as a music teacher as well. And coming to Edinburgh was really part of a desire to leave London. I think you often come to a point when the city you grew up in is no longer the city you live in. And that is not necessarily a bad thing, but I think if at that point you're thinking that city I'm in is not the one that I remember and not the one that I enjoy anymore, then it's maybe time to move. So me and my partner Nikki, we wanted to kind of leave London, and coming to Edinburgh was actually going to be the beginning of a European tour. We had a camper van, and we had keyboards and clarinet and accordion in the back, and we had all our kind of tea bags and emergency kettle and things ready to go off. And we got to Edinburgh, and we just kind of stuck. We got stuck here. Edinburgh is quite a difficult place to leave. It's a very special city, I think.
Okay.
And so, we ended up just staying for much longer than we realised. And of course, the longer you stay somewhere, the more it attaches to you and the more you love it.
The more it becomes home. I should have just said to everybody that this event is being recorded, and hopefully later will be available on our Facebook page and our website, etc. So Phil, you trained in music in London. Can you tell us just a little bit about that, your musical training?
Yeah, I began as a kid. I learned the piano. I learned classically. I loved it. I started lessons at I just turned 8, I think. I don't think I particularly wanted to. I think I was pushed into lessons by my mum and dad. But as soon as I started playing the piano, I absolutely loved it, and I instantly changed from wanting to be Pele to wanting to be Alfred Brendel. Now, neither of those ever came true, unfortunately, but they were both good heroes. And I did grades, I was quite good. I did the grades kind of quickly, and I got my grade 8 by the time I was about 14. And then I didn't play for a while because I was 14, and, playing Beethoven and Mozart wasn't really the coolest thing you could do at age 14. And there was, girls and going out and things like this instead. And then when I got to about 16, we moved house, and the only place that the piano could go was in my room. That was the only place we had space for it. So I found myself playing again, and I started playing jazz, and that was kind of cool. That was an all right thing to be doing. So I taught myself jazz music, and then when I got to university, I started playing more and more. And then I did a second degree in music. So my first degree was in cultural studies, and I did a second degree in music down at Goldsmiths, which was a fantastic eye-opener. I was a very good, competent technical musician, but I had no kind of sense of the breadth of music, and this degree at Goldsmiths really opened my eyes and, more importantly, my ears to a kind of world of music.
And Stephanie, what about you? Did you have any musical training, or what were you listening to when you were a teenager?
Well, I grew up in a household where, sorry, I'm aware that it's not, is it switching to me okay? Or is it?
Yes, it has now.
It is, okay, good, just checking. I grew up in a household where my dad listened to a lot of Brazilian jazz, and my mum listened to pretty much non-stop ABBA and Motown. So that was very much what I was brought up on, a diet of Motown and Brazilian jazz. I started singing when I was a tiny child, and I just kept singing, but I was very much a natural kind of instinctive singer. started playing the guitar a little bit when I was about 16. I still play pretty much as badly now as I did then.
Right.
But yes, I always sang, and I developed quite a love and an interest for folk music, and that was perhaps another draw for coming to Edinburgh, because when I got to Edinburgh University, I became very involved with the Folk Song Society, which was very vibrant and really good fun, and I learnt a huge volume of folk songs at that point. And then at a certain point, I wanted something a bit more challenging musically, and I also got quite into singing jazz at the time, and that was sort of the only real musical training that I got was in jazz, and it was just doing workshops and masterclasses, Fiona Duncan, jazz school, workshops with Sheila Jordan, people like that, and the kind of technical rigor attached to jazz was really good for my development as a singer. I used to set myself the task of transposing one song and arranging one song every week, and then performing it at the Bannerman's open mic night on the Sunday night.
Right.
And I did that for about a year, and it certainly increased my repertoire.
And was Edinburgh the first time you'd sung in public, or had you sung in public before?
No, I'd sung in public a lot, with one thing and another. I think my first band, which was called The Adventures of Luther Arkwright, I have no idea why, was when I was 14 in my first band. So.
Oh, right. So you were playing from an early age, or singing from an early age. Phil, what about you? When did you give your first performance in front of an audience, and what was that like?
It was as nerve-wracking as everyone else's first performance in front of an audience. I think that would have been when I was at Sheffield Poly. I was in several kind of rock and funk bands, and so we played there. On a circuit which sadly is increasingly disappearing. The back rooms and the top rooms of pubs, which are fundamental to a gigging musician's development, and we're losing them, unfortunately. But that was my kind of stomping ground and my training ground.
And so you both found Edinburgh a kind of vibrant place to explore your music further. Would that be true?
Absolutely. No, it was a fantastic place for me. I was also for a while in a soul band. There were 11 of us in the soul band, and I was one of 3 backing vocalists. So because there were 11 of us, I have to say we never managed to be paid more than we had drunk that evening.
Right.
And we also had trouble fitting in the back of a van. So there are many stories I could tell about that band.
Right. Well, maybe that's for another whole evening.
A whole other evening, yes.
And so you're both playing in Edinburgh in different ways and with different musicians and situations. You're both into jazz. What about your interest in Yiddish and Jewish music? Where did that begin? How did you get interested in that?
Who are you asking?
Well, we've switched to your lovely face, Phil, so why don't you go ahead?
My lovely face. Okay, I've got my lovely face on. Yiddish music. I didn't grow up with it. There was lots and lots of music in my house when I was a kid. My dad particularly was a kind of voracious music lover, and there was bits of Israeli music in our house. My dad was quite a fan. He listened to a lot of classical and jazz music, but he also had a kind of soft spot for folk music. So he was into things like, the Dudayim and Pete Seeger singing Senna Senna and this sort of stuff. So there was a kind of sense of Jewishness in the music growing up, but not Yiddish music at all. That came to me sort of by accident. I was living in Sheffield, studying at Sheffield Poly, and I was living with a guy called Owen Aronovich, David Aronovich's brother, for anybody who was at the Lit Talk. In fact, Owen is the reason why I ended up playing at Sam Aronovich's end of life party, if anybody was there at that discussion. And Owen was a trombonist and a tuba player, and he played in lots of street bands in Sheffield. And he came back one time from a street band rehearsal, and he said, I asked him what music he'd been playing, and he said, we've been playing klezmer music. And I said, oh yeah, what's that? And he said, it's Russian Jewish folk music. And I thought, well, that's, I'm kind of partly from Russian Jewish stock, so that appealed in that sense. But it just, that, as an idea, that caught my ear. And so I said, oh, play me some. So he played me a record of a band called the Klezmorim, which was one of the early klezmer revival bands, and I was hooked. I was instantly hooked on this amazing sound. It sort of struck a chord, but it wasn't like Coming Home or anything. That would be a nice romantic idea, but it was just great music, and it kind of married a lot of things. It married a sort of virtuosity that I liked, and a Yiddishness in the sound that I liked, and a folkiness and a jazziness, and lots of things that that we like about that. And then I moved back to London, and I was looking for work as a musician, and there was an ad in Loot, which was the free ad paper at the time, which was always a good bet for looking for work if you're a muso. And there was an ad for someone wanting a keyboard player for Jewish weddings. So I went and I met this guy. There was a guy called Freddie Ahari, who was this mad Egyptian Jew who wasn't a great singer, but he was a great big character. And I worked with him for a bit, and I learned a lot of no klezmer and Yiddish stuff, all kind of Israeli, and also a lot of Hasidic repertoire as well. I learnt with him, and he called me one time in a kind of frenzy. He was always quite a frenzied guy anyway, but he called me one time in a frenzy, and he said, Phil, you have to come over. You have to come over. I have an audition with a great band leader. And he said, I need you to come over and play for me. So I went to his place. He lived in Hendon, and I played for him. And this guy turned up, a very kind of grumpy looking Russian guy, very good looking in a sort of grumpy Russian way. And this was a clarinetist called Gregory Schechter. And Freddie, the guy I was working with, wanted to get into his band. And so we played for a bit. And Gregory, who was kind of furious and chain smoking, he hadn't been able to find a place to park anywhere nearby. So he was in a foul mood. And he stopped Freddie after about 2 minutes or something, mid kind of like that, and he was cut off. And Gregory said, I don't want you. Freddie, I don't want you to come join my band. But he turned to me and he said, but can I take your card, please? And so that was how I kind of, and Gregory was a fantastic klezmer musician, one of the first people to introduce klezmer music to the UK. He came from Kazakhstan and had trained in Moscow and had lived in Israel for a while, was an incredible musician. And so I started working with him, and that was really, I worked with him for about 3 or 4 years, playing weddings and bar mitzvahs and simchas and folk festivals and concerts and things like that. And that was where I got my kind of klezmer stripes, and also Yiddish song more generally. There you go, that was a long answer.
No, really interesting. I'm really interested in that fusion of different kinds of music, different kinds of personalities playing it. Stephanie, so what about you? What drove your passion to discover Yiddish songs and music?
Well, I think that I had a bit of a defining moment the first time I heard Chava Alberstein, because I just hadn't really realized what Yiddish song could be. And I've always loved, for a long time, loved klezmer music whenever I heard it. But of course, Yiddish song is different, because traditionally the klezmer doesn't really have that much in the way of vocals, and traditionally it would certainly not have been sung by a woman. So when I was first exposed to Chava Alberstein in that way, I just realized that this genre could bring together something that brought together so many strands of my life. And I guess that's similar to what Phil was saying, that, there's the fact that I did a degree in German, and I've always loved German language and literature, and here's this language that has so much in common with German that was completely fascinating to me. I actually was interested in Yiddish before I was interested in Yiddish song as well. So I had tried to teach myself bits and pieces without an awful lot of success. And then I went to a Yiddish class with Heather Valencia. I don't know if she's here this evening, but so this amazing genre just brought together my love of folk music. It brought together the jazz. It brought together the Jewishness, and my interest in Yiddish language as well. So it was like all, one big party.
Yes, a lot of things coming together there. So talking about coming together, Phil, you're playing in Edinburgh. Stephanie, you're singing in Edinburgh. How did the two of you meet?
Who goes first?
Stephanie?
Oh no, go on.
Oh, sorry.
I'll go, because I was the first point of contact, actually. I had started a band called Moshe's Bagel, and we were playing for, I don't know, a couple of years, year and a half maybe. It's going quite well. And not something I'd expected to do coming to Edinburgh. I hadn't planned to be playing Jewish music at all. I was expecting to play Scottish music. I was expecting to play jazz music. I was expecting to play probably anything other than Jewish music actually coming here. But for a number of reasons, I met a lot of people who also had kind of similar interests. And we were playing with Moshe's Bagel. We were playing at the Bongo Club. Not the original Bongo Club, the Bongo Club when it moved to the university buildings. And after the gig, a guy approached me, and he introduced himself as Josh, and he said, my wife sings Yiddish songs, and would you be interested in making some music with her? Which, again, you know, was not something I ever expected to hear at the Bongo Club in Edinburgh, and it was too good an opportunity to turn down, of course. So I said, yes, of course, I would love to. And then we met, didn't we, in the Favourite, I think, one of those much mourned Edinburgh institutions. And maybe you could take up the story from there, Steph.
Yeah, I was actually really annoyed with my husband for going up and talking to Phil because I felt like I wasn't ready to make the connection yet. I wanted to have a plan. I wanted to know what I was going to do, etc. But then, so I actually left it. I didn't get in touch for about a month or something, I think. And then, as you say, we went along to Favourite, and I had my little demo CD with my jazz songs on it, and some notes on the songs that I wanted to sing in Yiddish and so on. And because I'd been used to being in the jazz world, jazz piano players can be a bit gruff about singers, to be honest. I think I'm probably understating that. So if you want to put some music together in jazz, you usually have to pay a piano player to work with you, and then, you know, you get all the gigs and they will consent to come along and be paid for the gig. So I was fully expecting to, you know, maybe come up with some arrangement where I could pay Phil a little bit of money to accompany me so I could rehearse and figure out what I was doing. But to my great delight, he said, no, it sounds like a great idea musically. I'd love to do it. So if we're doing it, we're a band and we don't pay each other, kind of thing. So yeah, and then our first gig was actually Philip Mason. I saw Irene there earlier. And Philip Mason invited us to play Yom Ha'atzmaut. I think it was 2005, Yom Ha'atzmaut 2005, that we played. And I saw Elaine Samuels was here earlier as well. Elaine was definitely there, and quite a few people. Hilary and Arnold, I think you were there too. Yeah, and it was actually really a lovely, lovely gig. The community was so supportive, and we got such a wonderful reaction, and I think it really gave us that leg up to going on and getting more gigs and more interest for the band. So
yeah, I was there as well, I think in 2005, and it was really enjoyable. So yeah, definitely. But I'd like to just take you back. So you didn't know each other, but you get together in your rehearsal room, which sounds quite grand, but maybe it was in someone's house, I'm not sure. What were the first rehearsals like? I mean, did you just hit it off? Did you gel? What was that, Phil or Steph?
We did. We did just gel. I'd say instantly we hit it off, which is not that common, but it's not uncommon either. You know, if you're on the same wavelength as someone musically, then you can find a way to communicate quite quickly. We both had a shared love of Yiddish music and Yiddish song by this point, so we kind of, you know, it was, unless either of us were terrible, it was going to work quite well anyway, I think. For me, I think also I had never worked that closely with a Yiddish singer before. I had done quite a lot of work with people who sang Yiddish songs, but always in the context of a bigger band. And what Stephanie said about jazz piano players is largely true. At the same time, you can be, you know, it can be a very intimate relationship. It can be a very kind of powerful and meaningful thing, just two people working together, one person singing, the other person accompanying them. And so for me, it was a great opportunity to do that. And within the context of Yiddish music was an amazing chance. So yeah, I think unless I'm romanticizing it, and maybe Stephanie could put me right, I think we did hit it off musically and, you know, socially
Mm.
straight away. Yeah.
I
Well,
was
is
always
it?
amazed actually at how kind of easy it was to do new songs and so on, because at the time I was working for the University of Edinburgh, so I could get access to the rehearsal rooms at Allison House in Nicholson Square. So we would sometimes meet in my lunch break or, you know, straight after work or whatever. And, you know, and I'd have my little clutch of songs that I wanted to do. And I'd always I always try and rehearse them before, because to me, you know, you learn the song before you go to rehearsal. You don't go to rehearsal with a half-learned song um, normally. And we, you know, we'd try a song and we'd sort of play it for the first time, and then we go, well, well, that was fine, really, wasn't it? Didn't really need to do anything else.
And so, was it a case that you both brought songs to the room, and you both knew these songs, or were you teaching each other new songs that you didn't know?
I knew most of the songs that Stephanie was bringing that were traditional songs, or you know, composed songs from years ago. I knew most of those, yes. Although I was delighted that what she sent me or brought along were kind of interesting arrangements of them, you know, by people like Faber Alberstein and stuff. So that was kind of, you know, that sparked an interest in me, because that's quite advanced versions of Yiddish music, if you know what I mean. But the new material, no, that came from Stephanie completely. So maybe she should be talking about this right now.
Well, I think you're doing yourself a disservice saying it came from me completely, because Phil had a sort of, he has all kinds of stashes of tunes in his head that he's, you know, go, oh, I got a little tune we could just put in there, and you know, and there were all kinds of things came in, but the melodies and the words would usually be from me, and came from, it was a time when I was going to Heather's classes once a week, and it was a fantastic group of people. It still is. I think it's still going. Really fantastic group of people, and I was really enchanted by Yiddish poetry and so on. So I found that when I studied a poem and I would read it over and over again, that I'd just begin hearing it like music in my head. And it was also a time when we were pretty regular attenders at Salisbury Road at the synagogue, and one of the things that started to happen was little bits of liturgical melodies would creep into the poetry that I was working on to set to music and so on. So I had quite a few pieces that stole little bits of the liturgy melodies. Yeah.
Which has a venerable tradition in Yiddish music more generally.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So did you write some stuff together? I think there are a couple of tracks on the Zing CD that you've written together. Is that right?
Yeah, we've written quite a few things together. If we can just get a few more, we'll manage to do another CD. Well, they're not CDs anymore. We'll manage to do another whatever. So
Sorry, I'm old. Yeah, I think that would be very popular, actually. We'd love
well,
to hear more music from you.
it's on the list. COVID-19 managed to hit at a point when you work for WHO. It's kind of boom time at the moment, so there hasn't been an awful lot of spare time. But I'm hoping over the summer to have a bit more downtime and finally get to work a bit more on that. We also there's Ellen Galford was in well, I think I'm saying my Yiddish class. Phil also went to the class, but later than I did. And Ellen wrote a beautiful poem which we set to music, so it wasn't all old poetry and lyrics and things. There was some newer stuff as well.
I think that's one of the things also that appealed to me from a very early point on in the project, was that Stephanie was very keen on writing new material. I mean, Yiddish music is wonderful and rich and diverse, but it also suffers from a kind of surfeit of nostalgia. You know, that's the kind of default position of Yiddish music, is you know, is hand wringing grandmothers and dancing rabbis and things like that, which is fine and has its place. But most people who spend any time in Yiddish music are also kind of interested in creating new versions of that, with all that legacy and all that history in mind, but taking it forward. And Stephanie, right from the start, I remember actually you saying in February, you said, I'd love all this stuff and I love what I'm showing with Harvard Alberstein, but I also would like to write some music as well, which is, not often what you hear from people who sing Yiddish songs. Mostly you hear people, they say, did you know that Russian Kosmit mandolin? Let's do that one. Yeah, which is lovely, but it's nice to move a bit further, a
Yeah.
bit broader.
And I suppose in the history of Yiddish songs and singing, people have taken songs that weren't in Yiddish and translated them into Yiddish and done their own arrangement. And that's something that you've done as well. Is that right?
I don't think we've actually translated any songs that were originally in it, but we've taken versions of it. For example, the Barry Sisters version of Making Whoopee.
Yes.
That
That's
one,
right.
we did that one right from the beginning, actually. Yes, so there is definitely a tradition of doing that. Although I don't think we've ever really translated any of them. But one of the things I have always loved as well is, like Phil was just saying about the, hand-wringing grandmothers and dancing rabbis. One of the things I've always loved is that I feel we've never taken ourselves too seriously, because we have always sung about chicken soup and the Yiddish Mama song, and there's always been lots of humor, and yeah, I think that's healthy.
Mm. And you've played with a few other musicians, haven't you, over the years of Yiddish Song Project? Can you just tell us a bit about that? Bringing someone else in to make it a trio.
Yeah, we had a very nice relationship for a number of years with Gavin Marwick, who's a terrific, one of the best traditional Scottish fiddlers and a great composer in his own right. And that was very interesting, actually, because if you put a violin into Yiddish music, you kind of expect the big, soulful, Yiddish violin. You expect that kind of sound, all of that sort of stuff. And that's not Gavin's style at all. Gavin is a kind of much more rootsy Scottish folk player. And for my, as far as I was concerned, this actually brought a fantastic different dimension to what we were doing, and rooted what we were doing, although Stephanie was still in Scotland, I think, at that point, but definitely rooted what we were doing in Scotland, which was, was good. It made more sense of making this music in Scotland when you bring a Scottish musician into it. So we worked with Gav for a long time, yeah. And then more recently with a great Danish clarinetist in Copenhagen, Emil Goldschmidt.
Mm. And so it's really interesting, because I've always thought you have a very distinctive sound. I mean, the two of you together, but when you've had Gavin with you or another clarinetist, which is, I think, has made your treatment of the songs and the music very distinct. So that's obviously something that you were going for, finding your own sound for these songs.
Completely, yeah. But I think it's almost unavoidable, though, that you bring your own stamp to something. And I think we've benefited and enjoyed all the other musicians that we've worked with. We've also worked with Jika Learning and Joe Nicholson as well on clarinet, and each one brought something different to the sound. I would love to work some more with Gavin, and I hope we'll be able to do that maybe later this year when the pandemic madness subsides. But I would love to explore the connection between our music and Scotland a little more. Maybe living in Copenhagen now makes me sentimental. So.
I mean, I think in folk music there's a tremendous fusion between, different world music, isn't there? That the roots of certain folk songs is claimed in different places throughout the world. What about Yiddish? Do you think it's very different in different parts of Europe or even America?
Absolutely, yeah. Yiddish is extremely different. But it had so many dialects, and now the Yiddish that you learn as a foreign language is kind of a construct. They took a bit of Polish Yiddish, a bit of Lithuanian Yiddish, and so on, and they put them together to create a standardized Yiddish. But in fact, I don't think anybody really speaks like that except people who've learnt Yiddish as a foreign language. And in fact, at gigs, sometimes older people who had some knowledge of Yiddish would, they come up to me and say, can you speak Yiddish as well as sing, dear? And I'll say, well, yes, I can a bissle, and then they'll say, oh, that's nice. Your parents must be so proud, and kind of pinch my cheeks and stuff like that. And then they'll say, but you do know that you sound very Litvak, dear. Very Litvak, as though it's not a good thing. And I really should reconsider my ways.
Right. Well, that's you told, isn't it?
Exactly. I'm sure Phil has things to add on that.
Yeah, I mean, well, going to the music side of things, Phil, do you think the way people play, well, you've talked about how Gavin plays violin and what he brings to that. What about your own playing, with the accordion and piano? You've got a very eclectic musical background, but in terms of the repertoire of Yiddish Song Project, do you think has any particular influences from Scotland apart from Gavin's contribution?
Do I think that the music of the Yiddish Song Project does? Not especially, no. I think that I think it's more about what you think about when you're addressing Yiddish music, and there is, as an instrumentalist, there's a set of expectations often about how you're going to approach Yiddish music. There is a certain sort of weight, and I think that's partly a result of any kind of, the canon and the idea of authenticity in any folk tradition. Scottish and Irish music have this kind of issue as well, and the debate between authenticity and development. And I'm not, I'm done with those debates. I think that good music is good music and can take what it likes and move where it likes, provided it's done with commitment and with sincerity. However, in Yiddish music it's slightly different because, for obvious reasons, because of the big break that happened to Yiddish music and Yiddish culture. Not just in Europe, because of the Holocaust, but in America as well. Where Yiddish culture and Yiddish music and klezmer music had largely migrated by the time of the Second World War. After the Second World War, it really disappeared under the radar. So there was a big cultural kind of gap there in the States as well, which means that when you make a decision now to play Yiddish music or to sing Yiddish music or to arrange Yiddish music or to kind of address it in some form, you're not doing it from a kind of even playing field. You're doing it with all of this in mind. And I think that was, for me, again, one of the really exciting things about doing this project was that it was a chance to really push at the edges a little bit of this music while still making it, listenable. We weren't playing Yiddish music with underwater violins and radio waves and things. There were still instruments, there were still tunes, there was still language, there were still rhymes and things. But in terms of the sort of weight of tradition, I think that we, like Stephanie said, we took it seriously as musicians, but not too seriously as humans. And I think that the result of that was very strong. And I wonder whether that was a little easier, given that we were in Scotland, which has a rich Jewish life, but does not particularly have a rich Yiddish heritage. And I wonder whether that was made a little easier by being away from the kind of centres of Yiddish culture. I don't know what Steph thinks about that. Maybe I've just made that up right now.
No, I think I'd agree with you entirely. I think we just had total freedom being in Edinburgh. We had total freedom to do whatever we wanted, and there was no kind of disapproving hardcore of Yiddishist klezmer enthusiasts or anything who would tell us we were doing something wrong or anything like that. And the nice thing is that the whole Jewish community in Scotland was just delighted that this thing had happened, and supported us and turned out. And another one of our early gigs, I saw Helena was online earlier on, and we played at Helena's anniversary of her arriving in Scotland. I think it was 60 years maybe at the time. But yes,
it was 70. It was her 70th anniversary of arriving in Scotland.
70th anniversary. I remember it well. We had a lovely time. Yeah, and yes. So the community's always been really supportive of us, and it's been much appreciated. But
do you think both of your interest in jazz, where musicians can experiment a lot and improvise a lot. Do you think that also influenced the arrangements and the way you tackled the songs and the repertoire?
Yes, definitely, definitely. Especially given that it was just two of us working together, and I think that we drew at that point as much on the relationship between a jazz singer and their pianist as we did between a kind of Yiddish folk singer and their accompanist. Yeah, but I think again that draws on a move that happened in Yiddish music as well. I mean, a lot of Stephanie's mentioned Chava Alberstein. A lot of her music draws on jazz language. The Barry Sisters, a lot of the American Yiddish theatre repertoire was getting a lot of its influence from jazz as much as it was getting its influence from, the shtetl.
Great. Well, look, in a few minutes, we're going to invite the audience to ask some questions. I don't know if anyone's got any questions, but if you do have questions, if you could write them on the chat facility at the bottom of your screen and send them to our host, and then in a couple of minutes, we'll let you ask the questions instead of me. So, and just before we do that, I know, Phil, that you were in April due to be in Australia with Maush's Bagel, and unfortunately that had to be...
This didgeridoo is here in honour. This didgeridoo is in honour of the Australia trip that we didn't get.
I wondered if this was set there for a reason.
I can't play it. I can't play it.
Not yet.
Not yet.
So is that still going to happen, or at some point?
The Oz trip, I hope so. All the cancellations were given to us as postponements rather than cancellations. However, that was 3 months ago. The world looks slightly different now. I hope so. Our funders, Creative Scotland and Year of Scotland in Australia, have been great and said, the money that we've given you so far, keep it and let's hope it happens. I'm waiting to hear, but I'm hopeful that it will happen. Perhaps not next spring, but perhaps maybe next autumn, something like that. But it's it's tough times for musicians. No one's sure.
Absolutely.
No one's sure. Anyone who works in live, well, as many of you will know, anyone who works in any kind of live entertainment right now, it's a struggle. Yeah. And
so in the meantime, Maush's Bagel's CDs and music, are they available for people that...
Maush's Bagel CDs are available, as is the Yiddish Song Project available. Yeah. We still have some CDs. Yes. Everything's available. Go online to support people. Yes, of course. Yeah, they're available.
So let's just do the advert now. I mean, Maush's Bagel, your website.
You can get Bagel CDs on our website, moshesbagel.com. If anyone, I was... Stephanie, I owe you an apology. I was hoping to get a digital upload of our CD, mine and Stephanie's and Joe's CD, by tonight. I didn't, unfortunately. If anyone would like a copy of the Yiddish Song Project CD, I think the best bet is, leave a message here or email me at Maush's Bagel and I will sort it out somehow.
apology to Baldy, chicken soup. Lots of little bits of little puzzle, apology to Baldy,